Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. I'm Lee Hutchison, and Dallas King and myself make our way through the A24 filmography and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. Dallas and I are joined by writer-director Owen Kline to discuss the making of his debut feature, Funny Pages. Funny Pages has been out for a few weeks now in the United States, but finally arrives here in the UK today through Curzon. For those that might not be familiar with Funny Pages, it's about Robert, a high school student and aspiring cartoonist who rejects the comforts of suburban life, dropping out of school and leaving home, and he finds an unwilling teacher and unwitting friend in Wallace, a former low-level comic artist. Thanks so much to Owen for joining us and being so generous with his time, and hope you too will enjoy this interview.
I've had a lot of time to think, and I made the decision I'm not going to go back to school after winter break.
What? Pleasure to be able to chat to you about this film. I saw it at Edinburgh at the festival, and just loved it. And the audience were really into it. And I think that final sequence with the farcical Christmas dinner where everything just keeps going wrong and wrong, it just played like gangbusters, and it was like tears streaming down people's faces, crying so much from laughing. It's great when to be back in a cinema. And
it's good to hear. I mean, I got so happy when we get at least like 2 or 3 pissers in every like large screening where they're just like, I wet myself. Women, men, it's really been, that has been really kind and shocking. I thought the movie's laughs were more acerbic, you know what I mean? But there's some pretty some pretty nasty stuff that gets laughs.
Yeah, no, I guess is that the new sort of tag to stick instead of like horror films? If somebody fainted during the screening, they normally go with that. But I guess if somebody sort of if somebody pissed themselves with laughter, they might put that up on the poster.
yeah. I mean, I wanted them to,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. You think about a movie like The Hangover or something, and it is kind of, it's generations kind of doubling down of that kind of Animal House, I'm a zit nastiness, I mean, most comedies, especially 80s comedies, got really, really crass, like teen comedies especially. But, I don't know. It's funny. Some people's, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I'm insane, but I don't think that there's any laugh more crass than like a Hangover movie in this movie. But then I forget there are like old man penises and things that nobody wants to see. And I didn't think it would get such a vulgar reaction. That seems just the horror of the person. But some people have really been reacting to this movie like it's a horror movie. I didn't intend it to be a horror movie. I didn't intend it to be a coming of age. It was about a kid, but I didn't thinking, I'm writing a coming of age movie for A24. It wasn't that. It was an independent movie at first, that was, just sort of like a character study of a young cartoonist kind of, inhabiting this sort of self-created, kind of underworld.
What was your entry into the world of comics? I mean, did you have like a great local sort of comic store you could visit growing up? And what was your sort of gateway book or graphic novel? I know for myself, I think it was Chris Claremont's X-Men run in the early 90s. I had one in the local area I could go to, and because I don't think, perhaps this was maybe more being based in the UK, but I was completely unaware of like the likes of Crumb and sort of Harvey Pekar, Daniel Clowes and stuff like that, until it was like the movies that came along of American Splendor and the documentary and then sort of Ghost World and stuff like that. So, I mean, what was your gateway into comics?
What do you say, Chris Claremont? I mean, that was the kind of thing I was first interested in. Like, I tried to be a comic strip. I wanted to be a comic strip artist. I created all these goofy characters for, 3 or 4 panels and a punchline that I wanted to run in the newspaper. And then eventually, I grew out of them, was just trying to figure out, I remember, my mom or somebody saying, you should just try to practice drawing, more realistically. And when I would draw more realistically, I sort of get praised for that. But that's not, that's basically everybody's relationship. That's like a cartoonist, whatever, like Peter Bagg, who did all the hand lettering in the movie, who did all the text. Every single credit was handwritten. It's kind of astonishing. Like he used to do these and he used to edit R. Crumb's Weirdo magazine and write out the letters page and, the content table of contents in this tiny font. And we were like, no, we're not going to create a font out of your text. Like, you got to do it like the letters page, But, first it was newspaper comics. Then it was trying to get into superhero comics because that's what the local store had to offer. And by the time you're 13, 14, 15, you're just trying to figure out your taste. And, all these comics are coming in and people have their little brown bags, their hold bags where you got the new Daredevil or whatever. But I was always, even with superhero comics, I was more interested in the art and, because there weren't that many voices besides Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman, Garth Ennis, a couple of these more modern people still working or something. But I was totally drawn to more the older stuff, Jim Starlin's Dreadstar and, Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men, those trade paperback, that purple trade paperback of Uncanny X-Men, like that was some of the first superhero stuff that I really enjoyed. But I was more, like Golden Age, Silver Age, like I really liked like Doom Patrol and some of the odder, older DC and Marvel types, World's Finest, like weird DC things that were kind of interesting to me a little bit. Just and Plastic Man, Plastic Man was funny to me. And Plastic Man was like, it just had a sense of humor and it was screwball and it was Rubber Hose, you know what I mean? Like it was like a hero that it was just imaginative. And even Kyle Baker was doing a reboot of that as a kid, but the original Jack Cole ones, Police Comics, they were called, were great. But then I found the voices. Then I found like the underground voice. I found Crumb, and everybody was influenced by Crumb after that, which is everyone, you know what I mean, in the underground kind of in sort of self-expressive in self-reflexive comics. Crumb is sort of the godfather, and if you do that, you're indebted to him, But that was then it was like, oh, okay, these are the voices, you know what I mean? It was no different than, you could see the different drawing styles, you know what I mean? Superhero comics were more generic to me. It was more of a mill. You had to really squint and see the difference between one and the other, and inking styles and shadows. And, there's stuff that I see now and differences in the different styles. Jack Kirby is amazing. All these people, so many amazing people in superhero comics, but that were, journeymen of all sorts of genres. I mean, Wally Wood only did genre comics. He did superhero, he did everything. He did pornography, he did science fiction, he did horror, war comics. And it wasn't until the underground guys, and that was sort of, something like Peter Bag's Hate was so informative to me of like all the potential you can do with character, you know what I mean? And being in a music scene and stuff as a teenager and reading those was really, really influential.
And how much of this film is like a statement of intent of like the type of filmmaker that you want to be, like the type of stories you want to tell, who you want to work with, how you choose to make your films?
I don't think that way. I think pretty instinctively, I just sort of run towards what stirs me. I don't know. I mean, I try to work fairly unconsciously in that regard. And my focus is generally on characters. That's the only kind of saving grace to me in writing. And, I'm very suspicious and skeptical of story in general, and structure in that regard. I'm very skeptical of, feeling you need to hit certain beats. And the only thing that I really run towards and have any faith in is characters, because if I know two people and how they combine and, or have one person in mind with a really strong voice that I know and is a complicated person, and I can sort of fit them into it and the story with a different, and change their name, even if it's later, you know what I mean? If you just want to write in, Carl or Joe Schmo or whatever into that, dial space. But it's the only thing I have faith in, you know what I mean? And just, I don't write, most people write story and try to fit character through that. And it's like knocking a peg through a round hole in a way, I try to write the only thing I can really trust is, okay, well, I know that this character is real. Maybe this character isn't, and I get rid of him. But, he wouldn't interact with this guy anyway at the comic shop. He wouldn't talk to this guy, so he gets cut. You know what I mean? But you just kind of have to instinctively trust that, even on a level of comedy and joke writing and stuff. You don't want to write a clean joke. You want the humor to come from the behavior of the characters. I don't like super quippy I tried to write everybody the way that the voices in my head were speaking to me, I guess. And that's the only thing, again, that I really have faith in is just character and thinking about, okay, what's the full wide gamut of emotions of this particular character and their issues, their problems, how they see the world, their dynamics, their relationship with this guy is different than the relationship with that guy. They talk to this guy differently. They talk to that guy. They make a joke to this guy that they wouldn't make to that guy. And thinking about all of those things in a universe, if you're thinking about the whole dynamic in a way of everyone and fitting it together, that's all I really have, is just understanding, trying to make people talk like real people, which is actually much easier than trying to sit there and racking your brain for, oh, I got to write the best script. I got to write the best dialogue. You just have to sound like people, and the scenes have to, and there has to be some sort of internal conflict at the very least that the audience can project something onto, at the very least.
You mentioned sort of artists there. Daniel is sort of still learning and evolving as an artist, and he would, like anyone who sort of takes up drawing and stuff like that, would, I guess, start out by drawing inspiration from artists that they love, whether it's Crumb, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby and stuff. So similarly, I guess, what filmmakers have inspired you as, a director to make that leap into Funny Pages?
I guess starting with obviously all the kind of independent 70s cinema that we've all come to love, as a mass culture, but all the Altman and everything, but Cassavetes and blah 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 blah. But it was like Ronald Bronstein and the Safdies and the stuff that they were making in New York at the time, which was so adamantly the opposite of all the other stuff that was going on, that sort of under that mumblecore umbrella, you know what I mean? And they were just doing different stuff. That, and then Damon Packard around the same time put out his movie Reflections of Evil, which is totally a madcap, insane, self-made thing of playing this like door-to-door watch salesman. It's strangely similar. That movie, Reflections of Evil, came out around the same time as Frownland. They were both very similar and, clearly handmade pieces of cinema and personal and interesting. And what Ronnie did particularly, though, with Frownland and doing kind of reviving this kind of personal 16 millimeter filmmaking in that regard, where your fingerprints are just kind of all over this crazy thing, that was very appealing to me. And that, it was a direct corollary in my mind to something like George Kuchar's work. And George Kuchar was a cartoonist as well as an underground filmmaker. You know what I mean? I worked at Anthology Film Archives, where there was, they had a lot of the Kuchar stuff, and preserved it. And so seeing those films at Anthology and sort of that sensibility, and then seeing his comics in the magazine Arcade and, small publications like underground, because you think about it, San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s, there was an underground film scene, but there was also, that's where underground comics were born, and so he was in print, and you could compare and contrast styles of two different mediums. They're both narrative storytelling mediums, you know what I mean? His pacing in the comics, and they were a little bit more narratively focused, and he just did different things with the different mediums, and that was it was like, oh, you can kind of do it all if what you do is customized to your own inclinations and ways. And I mean, why wouldn't why wouldn't it be?
As a sort of young filmmaker in the arts, sort of yourself, you've worked in film and on shorts. How did your sort of learning process compare to that of, say, Robert, or even the dynamic with perhaps like an older mentor like Robert does with Wallace? How closely does your journey align?
Not at all. I mean, not really at all. I mean, a little bit of thrashing at 16, 17, 18 and threatening to drop out of high school. That connects in some way, but I never did. You know what I mean? I also did have a lot more friends than Robert in high school, but they weren't high school kids like Robert. They were, people I'd met in the DIY scene and in the music scene in New York and in in the comic scene, and all these things in the mid-aughts that were kind of going around, even the mumblecore world. But I was more aligned with Ronnie and Josh and Benny than necessarily any of those other people making stuff, because they were just making the stuff that stuck out like a sore thumb and was interesting, and not about just people in their 20s flailing and dating and everything. So the Josh and Benny movies, and seeing Frownland come out and everything. It's like I've had a lot of kind of warped mentor figures in my life, or people that I looked up to creatively in one way or another. And I've known a lot of people that I felt were unrecognized geniuses that kind of like guided me along my way. And none quite as depraved as Wallace, but I butted up against a lot of mental illness. I butted up against a lot of other people's bitterness and taking that out on me and others around us, and sort of self-destructive behavior being kind of put upon you. And I definitely thought for a long time that was a way to live, and that was the right, like, oh, I want to be like a bitter, I guess, I was working in all these stores, and, like I worked in retail and video stores and record stores, and I worked in a library, whatever. For many years, I just worked and couldn't get, any kind of like professional, like show business work or whatever, you know what I mean? I'd sort of like couldn't get work as an act. I was out of practice as an actor, hadn't done it since a little kid. And I just was kind of bottoming out, and was around a lot of angry, bitter people who wanted to be artists as well, but were working in media retail, and so that in some regards, was informative to, those personalities, and how those personalities even interacted with customers, and took it. I worked at the store Other Music, and in New York, it's no longer around. It's across the street from Tower Records, or no, it became no longer Tower when I worked there. But the thing, when if you tried to get something kind of generic when I was a kid or something from Other Music, they'd send you across. Yeah, go to Tower Records. That's for, that's where you get something like that, something generic like that. It was a very famously prickly atmosphere at Other Music. People were really freaked out by the staff, because there was just like an intimidation factor, and that's sort of a thing in New York, and it's a thing at Princeton Record Exchange. But I definitely picked up that disease along the way, you know what I mean, and have tried to shed it, you know what I mean. I really don't think, like, I'm not one of these people that goes like, oh, Marvel movies suck or anything. It's like I haven't seen one that particularly chimes with me, but like, you like what you like, I don't really, when you're a kid, you sort of try to adapt some sort of aesthetic world, point of view, and it's really, really, and refine that in some way. And for a lot of people, that's great, but for a lot of people, it's really, it really actually narrows you out in a way, especially socially, because you're more stubborn, you're less open to stuff. You know what I mean? You're less open to new stuff. You're less open to new channels that could potentially surprise you. So I try to keep my channels wide open, since, I was a more jaded, bitter person,
The look of the film, because it has an almost extra sensory quality to it, particularly in the scenes in the apartment that he stays in for a while. I could almost sort of smell and taste the atmosphere in the room.
What did it taste like? I can imagine what it smelled like, but what did it taste like to you?
Just sort of like stale sweat mostly and stuff like that.
What does stale sweat taste like? That's have you tasted stale sweat?
I'm at the imagination of what it would be like, just sort of like dried, caked on, sort of, haven't washed in days, sort of, if you were forced. There used to be a program on in the UK called, I think it was called The Word, that had it had this sequence where it was like, I would do anything to get on TV, and they would have to do stuff like, they would have to lick like a really fat person's armpit or something like that. It kind of felt like that kind of sort of gross out, just sort of like, you can feel yourself sort of like, oh,
I got plopped in front of the TV too early in front of Ren and Stimpy and stuff, and probably worked my sense of humor. I mean, that was my first entry into like American, crass humor, before South Park, or just humor, period. You know what I mean? So, maybe blame Ren and Stimpy. Maybe also, maybe sing, whatever. I'm not going to pick one of the two. Both.
But,
kind of put them both.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about the sort of the process of filming and the decision to use 16 mil, but I guess what you were saying is that you were inspired by, those particular filmmakers from the 1670s for that. You wanted that particular kind of look for this.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, practically, I wanted the movie like to be like all the environments and the main environments of the movie are all fluorescent light, and fluorescent light looks like science fiction, like raw shit on digital. It just doesn't look like anything. It just reads as sterile. You know what I mean? Which is not what this movie needed. So 16 gave it a texture and gave fluorescent light. It actually fluorescent light looks and flickering fluorescent light looks beautiful on film. You know what I mean? Like most things, it's very easy to make ugly things look beautiful. And I'm generally interested in, just trying to make, it just felt like an exciting concoction, I guess, that the fluorescent light and 16. But of course, all my favorite independent films were made on 16 and Super 16, and Squid and the Whale was. So I just had it in my head for forever it's like, okay, that kind of like $30,000 16 millimeter dream is which is a completely dead model for filmmaking. Like most people don't film an independent film on 16. Most people don't, do it for as cheap as we did it. But it proved to be, to me, the right decision.
Yeah, I thought the film actually, it gave it almost as like a timelessness. Like it doesn't feel like it could sort of take place sort of at any time. I couldn't really date when it was meant to sort of take. It has like a timelessness to it, I think, because of the fact it was shot on film as well.
One thing I really loved about the film, and I'm so glad I got to experience it in the cinema, was like it really evoked my senses. Like I could smell this film with like the character of Wallace. I could feel the heat in the basement, the cold at times. It would make my sort of skin crawl. How did you sort of like elevate this from something that you could just sort of watch and connect with to something that could kind of provoke those kind of rare reactions in a cinema audience?
I don't know. It's funny. I guess like I wanted to be a comedy writer as a kid, and I couldn't break in. I did all these packets for the talk shows and everything. With Letterman, when he was talking, like did all these packets in my early 20s and led nowhere. I couldn't get any writers. I couldn't even become a writer's assistant at one of these places. Like nobody would take me. And maybe I scared them with my jokes. I don't know. But and I thought that I didn't think. It's funny because sometimes you write this stuff and you don't really imagine like, yeah, I'm going to really like provoke people. I wasn't thinking that at all when I wrote this movie or anything like that. That's what's funny about it is that, something like the beginning of the movie, that felt right to in a way to grab you is what if this kid, you're a kid and you're ambitious and you have a teacher that you look up to who says you're so brilliant and everything. And then what if that all goes into question and then he goes, his analysis of you, he can see you in a way brighter than other kids in some way. And then he goes away, you know what I mean? And you question before he goes away, you question his intentions, you question his intentions of why he's saying this stuff to you. And it kind of throws you for a loop. And that's how he ends up a sort of unconscious flailing kid trying to break into being a cartoonist,
How do you balance like your filmmaking with the artwork and like the comics that's been created for the film? Like how much say do you have over like the images? Is it something that's kind of perhaps like storyboarded in the script and in development, or is it very much kind of entrusted to sort of your illustrator, Johnny Ryan?
The comics in the movie, I actually drew out first. So like that mental misadventures of Wallace comic or something, I boarded that. I drew that out and inked a version of that in my own style and then gave it to Johnny and said, can you articulate this through the Robert style that we had created, which is basically sort of a dressed down version of how Johnny already draws, a little bit cruder and a little bit, a little dashed off, a little more like 18-year-old would draw, 17-year-old, whatever. But I guess in terms of the filmmaking and shooting them, I mean, that was difficult because I'd shoot a whole scene. So for example, we'd spend a whole day. I remember like the first or second day of production period was in the basement apartment. So we shot all that delirious stuff in the basement and we're all exhausted, shoot stuff. And then I have to shoot the scene with Daniel drawing, Robert drawing this drawing of Cheryl in the basement apartment. His first night in the basement apartment, can't sleep, and he's drawing. And that was the first stuff I had to do where I was a hand model, where I was inking Johnny's drawings that he created in stages. So he penciled all these things, scanned them, and then would ink it a little bit, scan that, ink it a little bit more, scan that. It was like stages. It was done in stages. So then I had to sort of connect the dots with and cut in between that and a close up of Robert's face doing the drawings and laughing to himself. So then I could cut back and more was done, and all sorts of little magic tricks like that. And it's very actually difficult to see drawing on film and people creating comics on film. And I didn't even realize it until kind of going back and watching some other comics grammar movies. Like, you don't see, like Sean Williams and I, and Hunter Zimney and I looked at a lot of different movies for this movie and sort of trying to find the visual grammar of it and how to shoot artists and comics and everything. And it looked like even the Jim McBride 80s Breathless or something, where Richard Gere is kind of tearing through that Silver Surfer comic through the whole thing, and he sort of relates to the Silver Surfer and has all these kind of ridiculous lyrical diatribes underneath these panels. And we're looking at that and looking at Crumb and how to shoot narrative comics and things. But Johnny just dashed off the drawings really fast. I gave him a list of fucked up ideas, and this is what I imagine would be in this kid's college portfolio for some reason. These, it's two Hanna-Barbera characters jacking each other off or something. And, I just came up with a bunch of things that were sort of in his wheelhouse. These are the things that he naturally draws, but I was almost wrote him, just, you don't even need to follow. If you have something even more whacked out, then go, run towards it. But, yeah, that was working with Johnny. And then Rick Altergott was originally actually the guy doing the Robert art. Great cartoonist, came up with Daniel Clowes. They went to Pratt together. He drew for Cracked in the 80s with, alongside Clowes, and had his own, while 8-Ball was running in the 90s, he had a comic, part of the Fantagraphics, who put out, all these comics, Hate and Peter Bag and everything. But around that time, he had a comic called Doofus. So I originally hired him. He's a very lavish, he kind of has a Wally Wood style of drawing. Very lavish, very esoteric, old kind of, hyper neurotic kind of cross hatching, and it's very sweaty, obsessive work. And it proved, after putting together all these fucked up drawings and a combination of old things he'd drawn from the 90s, even in a portfolio for this kid, I realized no kid would ever be able to be this accomplished. It was just way too lavish. And the idea of the kid being sort of a little bit cruder, and having more of a kind of goofball style, goofball cartooning style that's a little bit less sophisticated in terms of line weight or shading, kind of one line weight. He could have drawn all that stuff that Kitano is going through at the beginning of the movie, with Sharpies, it was, and computer paper, you know what I mean? Like, the kid doesn't even use Bristol board. He's using computer paper through the whole movie. He's pretty green, but he knows his stuff, but he's green in regards to the tools maybe. But anyway, yeah. And then it was like, okay, well, we'll get Johnny to just crank out a bunch of stuff for that. And then those Rick Altergott drawings will serve for Kitano, for the teachers. And then it almost made sense. It was like there's like a corollary when you get to that work. First, you see Robert's work, and then 5 minutes later, he's breaking into after the teacher dies, and he's breaking into the apartment. Spoiler alert, and all that. You'd see this work that was his teacher's, and that was sort of, you imagine that this teacher was nurturing some backwards drawing inspiration or something, and this was it.
I mean, so Robert is this very interesting character. He's not that likable a protagonist at times. The poster even describes him as New Jersey's biggest dick, awful to his parents, his best friend, using Wallace essentially for his own ends. I mean, how did you work with Daniel to build this character to make sure that the audience were still invested in following his journey throughout the film? Because, I mean, certainly at the screening I was at, we are with him all the way, in spite of, his behavior sometimes.
Well, we understand what he's been through at the beginning. I think, the catalyst for the film and everything that happens in that first 5 minutes of the movie, and the complications within that, and the self-doubt of sort of having a mentor figure that's, that you trust, and that you feel like understands you and your voice better than anyone in the world. And then that person, and thinks you're so talented, but then all of that assurance goes into question instantly, and then that person then is out of your life. Like what does that result in? And for this kid, the downward spiral is pretty graphic or something. So I don't know. He is a dick, but I think most people going through the hormonal shit of teenage years, and that sort of American Werewolf in London transformation into puberty, is tough. And, people, I think we all block out how fucking horrible we were to our parents for at least, a day or a year there or something. And I just wanted to show a lot of that embarrassing stuff. And it's funny because people from all walks of life remember that time and that anger. You know what I mean? And I was really trying to think about also those like angry young man movies that, all the kitchen sink Brits, and, Mick Travis is not a kindly character, those movies, right? If and Oh Lucky Man, Britannia Hospital. But I was thinking about even like, although it's not class wise, it's not the same, like different worlds and financial brackets, but Richard Harris in The Sporting Life, or so the kids in Scum, aggressive, angry depictions of youth and young male angst in a way. But so I just always, but I'm also making fun of the character, and the movie does, and is sort of celebrating a certain Schadenfreude and kind of taking this kid down, and along with his sort of like defeating his ideals, which are many people's ideals, I think, you know what I mean, or many, lost and confused people's ideas in a way. Although I don't think the kid is totally wrong about all his ideals. I think that his approach to art is pretty sincere, and that makes up for things. And I think Daniel, the actor, Daniel Zellweger, who plays Robert, complimented the character really well. Because he read it differently than anybody else. Everybody else kind of read him as an asshole, and Daniel had this other quality going on of self-destruct. This sort of, it almost seemed like he didn't want to say the things that he was saying to Miles or to any of the characters where he's really lashing out. And there was this feeling of him, it's like as if he was lashing inward and outward at the same time. There was a self-destruction to his assholish behavior, that felt, it just fit, those words just fit in his mouth. And it was like there was more of like I don't know, just like some bad little imp kind of reaching out, but also you kind of feel bad. I don't know. He gave it a pathos to me. And this fact that the character is so self-hating, I think, is relatable and kind of at least gives the character some pathos. He has self-doubts, obviously.
I think we all sort of have, even in like sort of the film sort of critic world and whatever, you sort of see someone's writing and you're like, wow, that's really good. But then you're happy for them that they're doing well, but it then puts the self-doubt in yourself about, well, why can't I write like that? Or, why are they getting ahead and stuff like that? So you can see that in sort of his relationship with Miles.
It's anywhere. It's film, it's comics, it's anywhere. You know what I mean? It's just like, well, somebody else has some ability and is actually able to profit. And how the fuck do they do it? You know what I mean? It's like a complete mystery. And you're like, what am I? The first question is always just like, what am I missing? But it's really like, I don't know. That's a tough, I mean, it's interesting when the reviews personalize it. I haven't read too many reviews, but the ones that really personalize it, there's this, there is like there's so much that kind of comes out about, you just feel like they get really candid. I'll say it that way. You know what I mean? It just kind of exposes people a little bit when they personalize a review. That's interesting, but not that that's worth commenting on or necessarily is noteworthy. But, I mean, the culture around writing, film writing, comics writing, most people, I actually do think that critics' job is to sort of go in with a Mencken-esque skepticism about everything. You know what I mean? I think Pauline Kael taught taught everyone that, and that you can, a movie has to sort of prove itself. It's not the nicest way to approach art, but I think it's one of the right one. It's an approach, and it's a good approach. I'm very skeptical of movies. I have a love-hate relationship with movies, even with movies I love. You know what I mean? In fact, like the movies that really stick in your craw are sometimes the movies that impact you the most. It's not the stuff that you want to love and do love necessarily. It's the ones that just you can't get out of your head, and it's not necessarily a good feeling. I don't know. Liking something is, what does it really mean to like or love something? It doesn't. My movie doesn't really ask to be liked. It doesn't ask to be loved in any way. It just sort of is. Maybe I think, you know what I mean? I tried to just be honest, and and I also, the movie isn't designed to, it wasn't designed for general audiences in any capacity. You know what I mean? I really wrote this movie because I thought it would amuse me and my friends and would make it for nothing, for the price of film stock ultimately, and try to get some money for just film stock. That's what this movie and would play for. It was for 5 people.
I mean, when I sort of was getting into film sort of in the mid-90s, it was stuff like Clerks and Swingers and things like that. And it felt like, you found like a movie and you had the VHS and you would share it with people in order to say, oh, have you seen this great movie and stuff like that. Obviously, it was a lot, you had to do that back then. Obviously, with streaming, everyone gets every access to most films these days. But Funny Pages really does feel like a film that it's going to be like, some people are going to find it, love it, and then they're going to want to share it and say, oh, you've got to watch this film.
Thank you. It's been so nice. I've gone to a couple screenings where people are like, I've seen this 4 times already, and you just go, wow, it's kind of insane. Like it has picked up a really nice a cult following very, very quickly. You know what I mean? It's too early to call it something like, you need 20 years for a movie to really know what the hell it is, I think, even. You know what I mean? Things that are too contemporary and new, you just don't have any. There's things that I hated 10 years ago that I've come around to. You go like, oh shit, they really, there's no real obviously there's no really way to measure this stuff, but thank you. No, that's really nice. I mean, and those were the movies, that I saw and was sort of thinking that was the way to make your first movie and the model for it, and was naive enough to not realize that, that sort of $30,000 Sundance 16 millimeter dream of, oh, you make something that's your own and really lyrical and this and that, and people will respond to it. Well, I spent years trying to do that and nobody cared about this. So I had to find the money, and, it was very difficult. It was very difficult, but it's done. And I can't believe it. I couldn't believe that it got finished, but I that was one element of it, that because it took 6 years, you know what I mean? And before that it took, 2 years just of trying to get anyone to fucking read it, until Josh Safdie read it, and then it became so, and I was really just going to him for like advice. I was really going to quit. I was broken down. I was like, nobody wants to give me the money for this. What do I do? How do I do it on my own? I've seen you guys do it on your own, like, and scrap and hustle and find a way to actually, make a thing with a little bit of money. How do you do that? How do you operate with these people? And then he was like, okay, well, let me tell you to look at it and read it. And, he got back to me like a couple of weeks later when he had his shit together. I was like, I stayed up all night reading it. We want to produce this. I was like, what? How everything kind of changed overnight. And the project got a tiny bit bigger, but it always remained the size of what it needed to be. And the production model of it was its own. It was pretty small. So luckily, because the movie kind of existed under a rock, and I exist kind of under a rock in a way, I don't, I don't see a lot of very few things make it. I don't see the trailers. I don't see, I don't keep up actively with movies, but I have friends who are film critics that I talk to once in a while and go, oh, well, you should see, whatever. I don't even know what the last one that somebody actually convinced me to see was. I don't know, but like, I feel like I kind of live under a rock a little bit. So I feel lucky that, this movie hits culturally with anyone,
I love the actors that you kind of fill the principal and supporting roles with in this film. And I'd love to know how you kind of worked with the famous Jennifer Benedetti, who has kind of worked with your producers, the Safdie brothers, kind of on Euphoria. How did you work together to populate this film, and what was the process involved?
So I brought in a lot of my own people to this movie, and Jen helped me kind of fill it out. there were two casting directors. It was Bernard Telsey and his team, and Jen Venditti and her team, and she was street casting. She works with the Safdies and is incredibly just rigorous about finding interesting personalities. That's who I was drawn to. People keep around this movie saying this or that or ugly people, but I was just drawn to personalities that were strong to me and felt vivid and right for these characters. And once people were cast, I kind of customized the characters a little bit more around the performers, and tethered, found, they were already composite characters, people based on one person in this regard and one person in that regard, and contrasting those things within themselves and those characters. But once you kind of cast, especially people who are performing for the first time, you want to customize that dialogue and their behavior and the characters around them. And we kept growing those characters and shaping the dialogue and shifting it. It was a pretty collaborative process, although there's plenty of process, the overall bird's eye view of writing. Occasionally I do like a character sweep, you know what I mean, where a draft of the script would just undergo the Miles draft or something, or this or that. You can go back to characters and just kind of think about one character and their perspective, and bring as much life to them. But sometimes I do that, and then Miles would say, no, but the last draft I liked this line and that line got lost, and it was collaborative, in that regard.
You have a very distinctive voice with this. It's a new voice, and it's a voice I think will sort of grow and needs to be listened to, and so that's why I think people are going to sort of share it and stuff like that. But
very kind.
Presuming that you're wanting to sort of maybe stay in that lane for a bit longer, develop that voice. I mean, I guess you're not going to make the jump from a movie about comic books to a comic book movie, and jump to the next one.
Yeah. I'm doing. No, I'm not tackling Swamp Thing quite yet. Although it would be kind of fun. Nobody's done it right ever. Not Wes Craven. So why? I mean, so why could I do it right? You know what I mean? Like I don't really have interest in properties. I mean, I never imagined. I think this is maybe I can tell you maybe, although I might sound like a little bitch, but maybe what this movie has going for it is most independent movies that play at a place like, I'll just make up a festival like Moondance or something called that. Like, a lot of movies that would play a festival like that are, or independent film festivals, people aren't trying to make a personal film. They're trying to build a calling card for Hollywood that is masquerading as a personal film, So, and then they go and make, like a fucking Marvel movie right after, So I always find that funny, but, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to join Hollywood. It's just, I was never interested. Maybe one day, I'll just, maybe if someone ever actually, but I don't, if somebody gave me a blank check tomorrow, I don't know what the fuck it would be for. Everything I've written has sort of just been inspired by characters and people that I've known and personalities and composites. And I'm mostly interested in characters and comedy and humor and behavioral comedy and just keep finding strong voices within characters to, sometimes they'll speak to me, sometimes they'll speak to somebody else, and how I want to keep making movies like what you're talking about, movies with multiple worldviews in them and clashing up against each other. Movies that don't necessarily have, a worldview outside, a specific worldview outside of that, maybe, but allow the characters for their space and time to exist. And that's all the only real, I don't sit and think, okay, well, how do I develop this voice that I developed here a little, you don't want to, I try to not be so conscious about it. And when I write, I try, I wake up, the first thing I do is just I'm in like a Jungian, dream therapy. So all of my therapy is around dreams. So the first thing I get up and do is I write down whatever fucked up thing I dreamed. And you just write it. You just write it. Red telephone, bag of pretzels. Abel Ferrara showed up and shot me in the face. You just like write a couple details down, right? That never happened. I never had that dream. But like you just write down like da da da, and then you figure out what the fuck was the narrative of that, and then try to piece that together while you still have the elements. And that's usually how most days for me writing start. I try to start at an unconscious place, like right in the morning, and then ease my way into like character writing and other people's characters and trying to get in their skulls, basically. So that's the only. I don't think ideas. I don't have any faith in my ideas, and I'm very skeptical of story. So I try to design things for characters. How can I stretch out character and eke out this and all these different aspects of their personality through story, and do it in a way, okay, well, they would do this, but that would create a drama here, and that would expose this element of their personality that they wouldn't want exposed, or whatever it is. I really just try to take stock in characters and just believe, all right, well, let me just do this, and then I'll figure out a design around that and how to shoot that and cover that, although I think visually when I write, but like, I try to just go, well, what's this movie? The point of view of this movie is this character, is this idea, and their ideas are going to be challenged. And how do I challenge them? I have to have a point of view about that. But, most people are more, I don't know. I guess the movie is also pretty stylistic, I guess. But, all of those decisions, all of the illogical decisions in the movie, that even something like the decision to shoot 16, and fluorescent, just because it's more appealing towards fluorescent light, and also just spoke to the kind of film and project, like I was saying. But a lot of these decisions are actually rational decisions, or like logical decisions to sort of create a restraint towards the illogical. You know what I mean? The only reason those guys are sweating in that basement is because I was really thinking like, okay, if you live in a boiler room, what would you look like? What would it look like? And these people would be sweating, you know what I mean? And that provided comedy, that provided a perfect kind of conceptually, like the sort of a immediate kind of physical struggling, that this kid would sort of be drawn to like a magnet in some ways. Like, oh, great, okay, I'll sweat and be tortured down here in this. Oh, this is basically like a third layer of hell. This is great. What a perfect place for me. Instead of a high school.
Yeah, it speaks to his journey of that. How far he's falling, that this would be the place that he would want to be, instead of, in his comfort at home and stuff like that. And in high school, he would rather be here than anywhere else.
It's a comical kind of self-destruction in a way. I think he kind of like treats his life as a joke and treats other people's lives as a joke, because he's in a comic book of his own. He doesn't exist in the world yet. You're as a kid, as a little kid, you are not a part of the world. You're not. And then once you see yourself in the world and you in context, that's when you start getting fucked up. That's when you start getting a little bit bugged out. And I think that's what this movie's trying to tap into, I guess.
I just want to thank you for your time to speak about the film. Congratulations again. I mean, I loved it, and yeah, I'm going to be telling everyone I know to go and see this one, because it plays really well with an audience, even us Brits over here. It's a universal humor, I think, that the film has and stuff like that. And I can't wait to see what you've got next. And thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I hope you like the next one.
I'm looking forward to it.